and a very warm welcome to the Analyst dated 6 January 2025, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be covering the 7 set of current affairs issues which are featured in today's newspaper. The handout of this very discussion has been pinned in the comment section below for your future reference. Beginning with the analysis section, in the first topic, we'll be looking into this debate that whether the falling inflation level should be celebrated as the success of MPC or it should be a cause of concern for the policymaker, as it also put constraint on the future growth prospects. Moving on to the second topic, as in the upcoming days, the German Chancellor would be on a 2-day visit to India. So in this particular backdrop, we'll be looking into that why Germany is important for India, what are the areas of contention between the two countries, and how we can further improve our bilateral relation with Germany. Moving on to the simplified section, herein we'll be covering the 5 set of current affairs issues in the most simple manner possible, and wherever needed, we'll be doing the relevant value addition from PLIM's perspective. So stay tuned. So now, beginning with the first topic, which is dealing with the inflation levels in India. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 3, your monetary policy topic also, as well as the inflation topic also. So if you people have been following the newspaper, you must be aware of this fact that for the past 2 successive months, what we are witnessing, a declining trend when it comes to CPI, and it has fallen less than 1%. Now, various economists have pointed out that this is majorly because of the base effect. What is base effect? So, if last year you have a higher inflation, even though there might be a moderate increase in the prices this year, but because of the high base in the previous year, you will be getting the inflation rate low this year. Okay, how do we calculate inflation rate? So you will be looking into the price index of current year minus the price index of previous year divided by the price index of the previous year. I am writing it B, okay, into 100. So if this is high, okay, so if the denominator is high, obviously you will be getting a lower inflation rate. And that is what is happening when it comes to India. Various experts have pointed out that basically the lower CPI levels that we are getting, it is because of the high base effect. Now, in this respect, an article has appeared in Indian Express wherein the writer is pointing out that whether this low inflation rate should be celebrated as a success of MPC efforts to keep the inflation in check, or it should be a cause of concern. Okay, it should be something that should trouble the policymakers. Let's look into this particular debate. Now, when I talk about CPI we have studied right now that how it has come or it has fallen below 1%, as you can see this. But if I want to know that is there some structural problem in the economy, so I'll not be looking at CPI, I'll be looking at core inflation. So how do I get core inflation from CPI or the headline inflation? So from this headline inflation, that is CPI, I would be excluding those items wherein I witness high variability in the prices. That is basically your food items and the fuel items. Okay, so when I remove the food as well as fuel items from the headline inflation or the CPI, I get what? Core inflation. But the problem with core inflation is that in the miscellaneous segment, somewhere this fuel item gets, added in the core inflation also. And we also, get this demand for gold and silver also in the core inflation. So if I have to understand that whether there is some structural issue in the economy or not, I would not be looking at core inflation. Now I'll be looking at super core inflation, wherein I completely remove the gold, silver, petrol, diesel from the core inflation, and then I get the super core inflation. Okay, so if I have to understand that whether there is some structural issue in my economy, so I'll be looking at super core inflation. But when you talk about the headline inflation or the CPI, which is affecting you and me, okay, for that we'll be looking at CPI. So here we are basically restricting to CPI. Now we have studied this thing that how CPI has fallen. We are witnessing a declining trend and it has fallen, less than 1%. And when it comes to MPC, what was the target? They have to maintain the inflation plus 4%. Okay, so it could be within a band of 2% to 6%. This is the ideal, plus minus 2. So minus 2, 2%, plus 2, 6%. Now, some say that low inflation is good for the economy. Let's look into those reasons, and then we'll be looking into that why low inflation could also be a cause of concern for the policymakers. Now, why it should be considered to be as a policy success? Because see, when there is high inflation, what happens? When there is high inflation, you will be spending more amount of the income that you earn on food items, on meeting the daily needs that you have. So ultimately, if majority portion of my income is going for consumption, this is going to negatively impact the savings in the economy. And that is what something happened way back in 2022-23, when the inflation was higher than 6% for 9 consecutive months. Okay, so it negatively impacted the savings, and that is the reason the savings was roughly 30% in financial year 24. So this implies that if we maintain the inflation level at a lower rate, obviously people would be spending less on the consumption because food inflation would be in check. So ultimately this would give a boost to savings. So in order to encourage savings and the investment, we need to keep inflation in check, because higher the saving, higher would be the deposits with the bank, and if the banks would be having the deposits, only then they will be ready to provide the loans to the corporate houses at a lower rate. Okay, so cost of loans would be less. So this would incentivize the corporate houses to take the loans and do long-term investments. Then, why low inflation rate is beneficial? As recently the Finance Minister of India has pointed out that because of moderate growth. Why I am saying moderate growth? Because if you look at the nominal GDP, it is around 8.7% in the second quarter of 2025-26. That is the data which is currently available. So if you look at the growth, it is moderate and we have low inflation. So this combination is basically helping me to promote growth. That is why the Finance Minister of India has pointed out that India is currently in this Goldilocks zone situation. Okay, which is good from growth point of view, and there is stability also. Why? Because monetary conditions are basically supportive of growth. Because if the inflation is in check, obviously the MPC would not be raising the interest rate. Okay, so interest rate is somewhere ruled out. So this implies what? If the inflation level is low, obviously the interest rate would be going down, and if the interest rate would be low, this would incentivize the people to borrow from the bank. Okay, so this would give a boost to the aggregate demand. So you will be incentivized to take loans for buying iPhone, for buying car, for taking home. Okay, so home loans, etc. The aggregate demand would be there, and this would give a further boost to the Indian GDP. Then it is also helping in enhancing the export competitiveness. So if the inflation level is less, ultimately the exports would be able to compete with the other countries' products, and that is what is happening, irrespective of the fact that we have been yet not able to finalize the trade deal with the US. But then also in today's The Hindu newspaper itself, it has been pointed out that because of somewhere the low inflation level and the depreciation of the Indian rupee, what we are witnessing is resilience in export despite mounting US tariffs, as you can see here. Okay, so experts basically tell that when the inflation level is in check, it actually promotes macroeconomic stability. How? Because it helps us in promoting savings. Savings in turn promotes investment, and this ultimately brings us to a Goldilocks situation. And it is also helpful from export perspective also. Now, having understood the benefits of low inflation, why the writer has pointed out that it is a cause of concern? Because it is going to put some constraint on the growth potential of India. Let's look into that aspect also. So first concern which the writer has pointed out is, if the CPI level is falling, I told you the food item is a part of CPI. So if CPI is falling, somewhere I can say that the food inflation is also falling. So if food inflation is falling, this is going to negatively impact the farmer's income. And we know that when it comes to agriculture, 46% of our total workforce is employed in the agriculture sector. So just connect the things. You will be able to understand what is this ripple effects. Majority of our workforce is employed in agriculture, food inflation going down. So that means their income is falling. When their income is falling, obviously their consumption would also go down. And if their consumption goes down, it would be negatively impacting India's GDP, because when it comes to India's GDP, the private final consumption expenditure accounts for 60% of India's GDP. So when you talk about the Indian economy, we are basically a consumption-led economy. So if the farmer's income is coming down, That means majority of the population which is employed in agriculture, their income is coming down. Ultimately, this would be negatively impacting the consumption demand and hence the GDP of India. Then it can also create double balance sheet problem. What is this double balance sheet? You all must have read this, the twin balance sheet problem. That is what I am referring here. So if the economy is not performing well, basically if the inflation level is low or the prices are low, that means it is going to negatively impact the profit margin of the corporate houses. Okay, if the prices are low, obviously the corporate houses would not be able to, get or create a higher profit margin because this diminishes their pricing power. So if the corporate houses would not be able to make huge profits, ultimately they might not be able to repay the loans that they have taken from the banks. And if there is problem with the corporate house's balance sheet, it would ultimately get reflected in the bank's balance sheet in form of NPA. I am not saying that this has happened currently, but these are the possibilities if we don't, address this lower inflation level that we are currently witnessing in India. Alright, then the writer has further pointed out that this is going to have a negative implication for fiscal deficit also. Why? We have introduced GST 2.0 reforms, and in that we actually reduce the GST rates on majority of the commodities. Why we did that? Basically to give a boost to the consumption. Why? Because I told you Indian economy is a consumption-led economy. Alright. So this lowering of tax rate, it was assumed that we have lowered the tax rate. This would increase the consumption and hence the tax revenue would increase. But what is happening currently? Because of the lower inflation level, the GST collection is getting impacted. Because the prices are low, corporate houses are not able to perform very well, they will be paying very less tax. Plus, when it comes to farmers, they are earning very less, so they would not be buying a lot of commodities. So when the consumption would be low, ultimately the GST collection would go down. So in this respect, the writer is basically pointing a very crucial question that will the growth in tax revenue persist with persistently low inflation? So that is something we need to be worried about. And you also need to understand this thing that when it comes to GST collection, that is dependent upon our nominal GDP. Earlier, what used to happen, when it comes to nominal and real GDP, there was on an average a difference of 3 to 4 points. But in the second quarter of financial year of 25-26, the gap between the nominal and real GDP has, reduced manifold. So nominal GDP, it is 8.7% and real GDP is 8.2%. So the average difference that we used to have of 3 to 4%, that has reduced. Why this is a problem? Because if the nominal GDP is less, that means the GST collection would also be less. Some of you who are not aware of this thing that what is nominal and real GDP, let me just quickly sum it up for you. When it comes to, real and nominal GDP calculation, this year, let's suppose last year 2025, and we had 2011 and 12 as the base year, right? This is the current year. So whatever quantity we produce this year and whatever is the price prevailing this year, when we multiply this two, this gives us the nominal GDP. And how do we get the real GDP? I have to look into that what was the price that prevailed in the base year. So I'll be multiplying this base year price with the quantity produced this year. So I'll get the real GDP how? Quantity produced in current year multiplied with the price of the base year. So you can see that when it comes to nominal GDP and the real GDP, the difference is basically with respect to price, because quantity that we are considering is same in both the case. Okay, so this clearly tells us that the prices have fallen, and since the nominal GDP is coming down, this is going to negatively impact the GST collection because that is dependent upon nominal GDP itself. Now, another, economic concept that you can associate with this issue, that why it should be a cause of concern, is the Phillips curve. Now, Phillips curve basically tells us a inverse relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. So, it clearly tells us that if you want to reduce the unemployment level, you should be, ready to let the inflation rate to be increased. Okay. Now, a crucial economic concept which you can associate with this growth constraint aspect itself, that is the Phillips curve. So, Phillips curve basically tell us an inverse relationship between inflation rate and unemployment rate. So, it basically tells that you will be able to reduce the unemployment rate only when you allow the inflation rate to increase. Why this is so? See, if the prices of the products would increase, that means there is higher aggregate demand in the economy. So, when there would be higher aggregate demand in the economy, the corporate houses would be incentivized to increase the production. But for increasing the production, they would have to hire workers. So, demand for labor would increase and ultimately the unemployment level would go down. But when the inflation rate is very low, this implies what? That the unemployment level would rise. This you can associate and understand clearly with the deflationary spiral. So, we have lower inflation, that means there is lower demand. So, we have already produced the commodities, but there is lower demand. So, ultimately what would happen? The corporate houses would be, would have to reduce the prices to basically sell off whatever they have produced. But this falling price clearly tells me that the corporate house is not able to maintain a profit margin. So, if the corporate house is not able to earn enough profit margin, ultimately they would be defaulting upon the loans that they have taken. This could lead to twin balance sheet problem also, coming to deflationary spiral. Because of this default, what would happen? Bankruptcy would be there, and ultimately if the corporate house would not be able to perform well, it would be laying off the workers, or whatever workers it would be employing, it would be cutting the wages. So, when the wages would go down or the unemployment rate would increase, ultimately again this would lead to fall in demand. Okay, so lower inflation level is problematic because it could lead us to deflationary spiral as well. Then another concept that you can associate with this debate is your liquidity trap. Now, in order to understand this, you need to understand the speculative demand for money. Speculative demand for money is basically the asset demand function of money. Okay, in this we basically assume that either you are going to hold money in liquid cash or you are going to invest in bonds. Okay, for simplification we assume this. Now, in order to understand this concept of liquidity trap, you need to understand that what is the relation between bond price and interest rate. In order to understand this, let's take an example. Let's suppose a corporate house A is there. It has issued a bond which provides you a coupon rate of 4%. Remember, when it comes to a bond, for people who are new to this particular session, bond is basically a piece of paper issued by government or by the corporate houses to basically get the money from the market. Okay, and people like you and me, we buy the bonds. So, when it comes to bond, it is an instrument, financial instrument, which would be giving you returns. So, here the interest rate which the government or the corporate house would be giving you, that is called as coupon rate, and it remains fixed irrespective of the market price of the bond. Okay, so coupon rate is 4%, bond price is 1000. Okay, this is, I am assuming this is the face value. Face value is the price which is written on the bond itself. And let's suppose the maturity period is of 5 years. Okay, so 4% of 1000 basically comes down to 40 rupees. So this 40 rupees either you will be getting on an annual basis or on a semi-annual basis. That would be decided when you will be buying that particular bond. Okay, so this is the scenario. Now let's suppose in the market what happens, the interest rate falls. So from 4% it goes down to 3%. What would happen in this scenario? The new bonds which would be issued in the market, they would be giving you a return of merely 3%. But the previous bond which was issued by corporate house A, that was giving a higher return. So suddenly what would happen? The demand for this particular bond would increase. And when the demand for a particular entity increase, what happens to the price? Price of this bond would increase. So if I am holding this bond which was issued by corporate house A, because of this changed market situation, if I want to sell, I will be getting a higher price. So since I bought at, let's suppose 1000 rupees, but I might be selling at a higher price, that basically refers to what? The situation of capital gains. Okay, now let's take the reverse. In reverse, I am assuming that from 4%, the interest rate rose to 5%. Now just reverse the situation. The new bonds which would be issued in the market, they would be giving a higher rate of return as compared to the bond issued by corporate house A. So what would happen to its demand? It would go down. So when the demand goes down, what happens to the bond price? It also goes down. Okay, so if I was holding this particular bond issued by corporate house A, given the changed market scenario, if I want to liquidate my bond, I will be getting a lower price. This is a situation of capital loss. Okay, now whatever we have understood, let's just try to understand it further. So this is a situation of what? Bond prices is increasing. This is a situation of capital gains, and this is a situation of capital loss. Okay, because bond price is coming down. So having understood the capital gain and capital loss, let's now come to this particular graph. Now, what happens if the interest rate is very low at this minimum level? People would be having this, anticipation or expectation that in the future, interest rate would be going up. And if in this scenario, I hold a bond, ultimately what would happen? If the interest rate increases, I would have to undergo a capital loss. So to avoid this capital loss situation, what people would do, they would not hold any bond, rather they would hold liquid cash. Okay, so below this R-mill level, this particular shaded region, this region is basically referred to be as liquidity trap. Because beyond this level, monetary policy becomes completely ineffective, and that is what is happening in case of Japan. Okay, so here people prefer to keep money in liquid form and not invest in bonds. So if you have a lower inflation level, ultimately if the inflation level is low, the MPC would be reducing the repo rate, and if it reduces to this level, then we can enter into liquidity trap situation also. Okay, which would be problematic for corporate finance because nobody would be interested in buying a bond. Okay, although we have not reached this situation, the repo rate is at a stable level, but if the low inflation rate persists, then this could be a possible scenario as well. So having understood from different, economic concept, the writer basically concludes this particular debate pointing out that for the economy to be in a good shape, we need to maintain inflation level at a rate of 4%. Okay, that is what is the ideal inflation rate that should be there. And if the inflation rate is maintained at this level, only then we would be able to give effect to virtuous economic cycle, which was highlighted by Economic Survey of 2018 and 19. Let's just understand what is this virtuous economic cycle. Now see, if the inflation level is in check or it is moderate, obviously the savings would also be moderate. Now the savings are moderate, that means demand would also be moderate, and the deposits with the bank would also be moderate. Now, as the deposit with the bank is moderate, so the cost of loans would be less and there is moderate demand, so corporate houses would be incentivized to increase the investment. And if the investment increases, what happens? The GDP increases. When the GDP increases, your income increases, and herein we also need to understand one another concept, that is marginal propensity to consume. So marginal propensity to consume basically tells me that if my income is increasing by 100%, what is the resulted percentage change in consumption? So in economics, this marginal propensity to consume is always, between 0 to 1. So this implies that the change in consumption given the change in income would be always less than the change in consumption. This is what I'm saying. Okay. So if your income is increasing, the change in consumption would be always less than the increase in income. Okay. So this points out what? That my income is increasing, let's suppose by 100 rupees, my consumption is increasing by 20 rupees. So ultimately the rest of the 80 rupees is going to what? Saving. So this is what is virtuous economic cycle. And we need to give effect to this virtuous economic cycle if we want to realize the idea of $7 trillion economy. Because when it comes to China, when it was in its growth phase, it maintained a saving rate of 40% of its GDP. And in India, saving rates has fallen to 30% of its GDP. So that is problematic. Okay, that's all with respect to this particular topic. Now, as you can see, UPSC has asked a question on the similar lines what we have discussed. So try practice this particular question, and whatever we have discussed on the same lines, I have framed a question for you people. So do practice this question. With this, let's move on to the next topic. So beginning with the second topic, in the upcoming date, that is 12th and 13th of January, the German Chancellor, that is Friedrich Merz, would be on a 2-day visit to India after he takes the charge. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2, India and its neighborhood relations. Now, first thing that we'll be looking into, that what are the countries which share the border with Germany? This could be asked in the prelims exam. So it is Poland, Czech Republic, Austria, Switzerland, France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Netherlands, and here you have Denmark, here you have North Sea, and here we have the English Channel. Now, coming to the mains point of view, why Germany is significant for India? Let's just look into from different perspectives. So from trade point of view, if you look at, Germany is India's largest trading partner in the European region. And when you look at the bilateral trade between the two countries in financial year 2022-23, it was around 26 billion US dollars. Germany is not just important from trade point of view, it is also important from investment point of view. So Germany ranks the 9th largest source of FDI source when it comes to India. And the FDI which have entered into India from Germany between April 2000 and December 2023, cumulative FDI of around $15 billion have come from Germany to India. From the economic point of view, more than 200 Indian companies are working in Germany, and the two countries have signed a strategic partnership agreement way back in 2000. And last year, we completed 25th anniversary of this strategic partnership. In strategic partnership, the two countries do not just engage with each other with respect to lowering the barriers with respect to trade in goods. They also lower the trade barriers with respect to trade in services, with respect to investment and other areas of, common interest. So they collaborate in different areas as well. Then to further strengthen the relation, the two countries have launched the intergovernmental consultation way back in 2011 at the levels of heads of government. So it basically implies that the heads of government would be meeting on a regular basis, and they would be looking into whatever contention is there between the two countries, and they would also be strengthening their cooperation in other areas, for example in emerging technologies like AI, machine learning, quantum technology, etc. Then from the environment point of view, Germany is the member of India-led initiatives like Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure and International Solar Alliance. Then the two countries are adamant supporter of reforms that should be brought in the global institution, that is UN Security Council, and the two countries are a part of G4 grouping. What are the other countries which also form a part of G4 countries? That is your Brazil and Japan. And all these countries are adamant, when it comes to reforms that should be brought in the UN Security Council, and each of these countries basically support each other's bids for permanent membership in UN Security Council. Then in the defense domain as well, the two countries have signed the Defense Cooperation Agreement way back in 2006, and based on this particular agreement, they have also set up joint working groups on counter-terrorism, cyber security, etc. And the two countries are also carrying out different joint military and other kind of exercises, for example, exercise Milan, Tarang, Shakti, etc. Having understood the fact that why Germany is relevant to India, let's just look into what are the bone of contention between the two countries. So the first issue is with respect to trade, and this is with respect to CBAM, that is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which has come into force this year only from 1st of January. And this is going to severely impact the steel and aluminium exports from India. So what is this CBAM? So when it comes to the European companies, they have to adopt an environment-friendly production process. So because of that, the cost of the product that they are producing is quite high. But the Indian exporters here who are producing the goods by using a production method which is not environment-friendly. So since they are not adopting advanced technology and environment-friendly processes, the cost of the product is quite less. So to match the cost of European Union companies and the steel and aluminium products coming from India, now the European Union has given effect to carbon border adjustment mechanism, wherein a carbon tax would be imposed if the Indian exporters are not adopting an environmentally friendly production process. Okay. So this is a kind of non-tariff barrier which is going to negatively impact India's exports. Then the two countries have divergent viewpoint when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In this particular backdrop, what Germany did, when it comes to Germany, it reduced its dependence on Russia, especially when it comes to energy. But when it comes to India, we maintain a neutral stance, and rather we have actually increased our imports of Russian crude oil, as you can see from this figure itself. Okay. So this was something, data point provided in yesterday's newspaper itself, that how India's import of Russian oil are going up. So on this point, the two countries have different viewpoint. Then in the area of digital trade also, there is divergence, because if you go by the European Union digital data protection regime, it goes against the data localization norms of India. But when it comes to Indian laws, it prioritizes data localization. That means whatever sensitive information is there, that needs to be stored here in the computers which are situated in India. This is being done by the Indian government to basically preserve the privacy of Indian citizens, and this becomes also important from the law enforcement point of view. Just imagine the situation, the law enforcement agency need data with respect to a particular person, but that data is not available in India. So again, we have to, make a request to countries that please provide the data. So from law enforcement perspective, we have went with data localization. That means whatever sensitive information is there, the companies have to store that data here in India itself, so that in case the law enforcement agencies need some data, they can easily get that. Okay. But when you talk about European Union, their general data protection regime goes against this India's data localization norm. So there again, we are having some differences. Then at various point of time, what we have seen is Germany has been insensitive to India's sovereignty related issues. For example, way back in 2022, the German finance minister has pointed out that the United Nations should come and resolve the J&K issue between India and Pakistan. This goes against India's stance, because India considers Kashmir to be a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan, and no entity is allowed to interfere in that particular matter. Okay, so such statements go against India's sovereignty. Now, having understood the areas of cooperation, the bone of contention between the two countries, what needs to be done so that we can further enhance our bilateral relation with this important player in the European Union region. So first and foremost, the two countries can collaborate in the green technology and enabling each other to make a green transition. For example, in electric mobility, green hydrogen, renewable energy, etc. Then Germany can help India in developing a resilient supply chain, especially in the domain of semiconductors. Last month, we have studied the topic of semiconductor, and therein I told you how Germany is a major player there when it comes to designing the advanced chips. Okay, so Germany can help India in developing Atmanirbharta when it comes to semiconductor supply chain. Okay, this would enable India to reduce its dependence upon countries like China as well as US, okay, which are becoming more and more unsustainable nowadays, okay, especially when it comes to USA. Everything is guided by a transactional approach, okay. So anything which is going to benefit Trump administration, that only would be pursued. He is not going to look into that what is in favor of India. And that is a major issue why we are still not able to resolve or, get the US-India trade deal finalized. Then, whenever the Germany officials are making any statement which is associated with India's sovereignty, they should adopt a supportive tone, and they should always take into consideration the India's concern with respect to that particular matter before making a remark on that particular issue. And lastly, the two countries should further enhance the dialogue and engagement, and they should try to collaborate in different domains. For that, they should ensure high-level meetings, not only among the head of government, but we should expand track 1.5 dialogue. Therein, we would also be, taking into account different stakeholders like businessmen, academics, civil society representatives, etc. Okay, that would further strengthen our bilateral relation with Germany, which is an important player when it comes to European Union region. With this, we have come to end of this particular topic. On the discussion that we have, based on that, try and attempt this particular question which I have framed for you. With this, let's move on to the simplified section. Now, after capturing the Venezuela president, US administration has also threatened that it would be taking adequate action against two other Latin American countries, that is Colombia and Mexico. Let's understand why. This particular topic you can associate with the current affairs section, current events of international importance when it comes to prelims. And why US administration have threatened that it would be taking adequate action against these two Latin American countries, that is your Colombia and Mexico. Here you can see. It is because they are the one who are facilitating narco-terrorism in US. Now, the experts have pointed out that this particular threat given by US to these two Latin American countries, it is not just a reflection of Monroe Doctrine, which was given way back in 19th century, which basically tells us that the Western hemisphere should be a zone of US influence. No other major power is allowed to exert influence in this particular region. The experts have pointed out that apart from this Monroe Doctrine, it is also a reflection of the ideology of Trump administration, their war against drugs, and the immigration issue that they are facing with respect to countries like Mexico. Now, let's just quickly look into that. What is this Monroe Doctrine? So, it was given way back in 19th century by the then President James Monroe in 1823. And it clearly stated that the European countries are not allowed to exert influence when it comes to the Western Hemisphere, because that is a zone of US influence. And in return, US promised that if you don't interfere in this Western Hemisphere region, we would also not be intervening in the European affairs. Okay, that's a promise. Now, going by this particular doctrine, what the President Roosevelt did, he actually justified US intervention in the Latin American countries. Okay, taking reference to this Monroe Doctrine, because US has to establish its influence in the Western Hemisphere. And now when it comes to the Trump, he is also taking reference to this particular doctrine. By referring to this particular doctrine, what he is doing, he is reaffirming US dominance in this Western Hemisphere region, and he has waged a war against drug trafficking. He is taking adequate measures to stop the illegal immigration in US from countries like Mexico. And the steps of US administration is also trying to curb the influence of China and Russia when it comes to the Latin American countries, because certain Latin American countries have tilted more towards Russia and China. So that is the reason the Trump has stated that he would be taking adequate measures against such Latin American countries so that he can establish the US influence in the Western Hemisphere region again. Now, let's just quickly look into that. What was the relation between US and these Latin American countries against whom the Trump has stated that he would be taking requisite measures. Now, when it comes to Colombia and US shared a very cordial relation. Okay, and Colombia was considered to be a major security partner also in South America. Colombia used to export crude oil to US as well as coffee and roses. And if you look at the diaspora in US coming from Colombia, way back in 2021, 1.6 million people of Colombian origin were there in US. Now, the question arises, if the two countries were sharing a very cordial relation, then what went wrong? So, the first thing which became a bone of contention between the two countries is Colombia emerging as a leading producer of illicit drug, that is cocaine, as well as coca plant, okay, from which this drug is derived. And Colombia basically accounts for over 2/3 of the total production worldwide when it comes to this drug. Then what happened? The relation got strained right from the time when Gustavo Petro became the Colombian first ever leftist president. So at that time, in order to improve the relation, the US President Joe Biden designated Colombia as the major non-NATO US ally. Okay. But when it comes to Mr. Petro, he was unwilling to cooperate with US when it comes to US-backed drug policy, and rather he expressed the interest that he wants to become a part of the BRICS grouping, which US perceive as anti-US. And adding further fuel to the controversy that was going on, Mr. Petro stated that he would be breaking ties with Israel, which is a major friend of US. Then in January 2025, when the Trump sent a helicopter, okay, which was carrying the Colombian deportees, the Colombia administration refused to accept them. And recent attack of US on Venezuela was criticized by Mr. Petro. So because of all these reasons, the Trump administration has stated that he would be taking adequate measures and, against Colombia. The similar somewhere is the story with Mexico also. When it comes to US and Mexico, they shared good economic relation. Mexico was once US largest trading partner in 2023. So what happened here? First issue was with respect to trade of drugs, okay, narco-terrorism, which was supported by Mexico. So when it comes to Mexico, it is the global, producer of fentanyl, which is causing drug overdose when it comes to US. Okay, so this is one reason. Then when the Trump was campaigning for his presidential candidature, at that time he has promised that he would be building a border wall between US and Mexico. Why? To basically curb the illegal immigration which was happening from Mexico to US. So these are the two regions which are becoming a bone of contention between US and Mexico. Going further, when it comes to Cuba, the US has pointed out that with the fall of Venezuela, Cuba would also not be able to survive. Okay, let's understand that how the relations were between US and Cuba. So when it comes to Colombia and Mexico, initially US shared a cordial relation with them. But when it comes to Cuba, from history perspective also, if you see, the two shared a very troublesome relationship. During the Cold War period, a group of revolutionary led by Fidel Castro seized the control of Havana, and this group basically overthrew the US-backed government. So in return, what US administration did at that time? So they recognized Fidel Castro as the new leader, but at the same time, they also imposed economic sanction as well as strict travel restrictions. Then, in order to overthrow Fidel Castro, there was an infamous Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. But this attempt of US failed. And all these, series of incidents basically brought Cuba close with Russia. But later on, when Barack Obama became the president, in 2008, he tried to normalize the relation with Cuba. So he eased the travel restrictions, allowed the Cubans who were working in US to send remittances back home. Then he removed Cuba from the terrorism sponsor designation, and the two nations reopened embassies. Okay, and they signed a series of agreements. But when Trump became president, he reversed all these things. And in addition, Trump also imposed travel restrictions. He understood this thing that when it comes to Cuba, he understands this thing that when it comes to Cuba, it is basically driven by tourism industry. So when it comes to Trump, he imposed travel restrictions on the American citizen that you are not allowed to go for tourism perspective to Cuba. So this has actually led to crippling of the Cuban economy. Okay, and Cuba, who was majorly dependent upon Venezuela for the oil and has received large-scale foreign investment from China and Russia. So with the falling down of Venezuela, the Trump has stated that Cuban economy would also not be able to survive the same, okay, because now it would be very difficult for Cuba to get the oil at a discounted rate. Now, going further, US administration has also stated that they would be capturing Greenland, which basically is a part of Denmark. So let's just understand that why Trump is so much interested in occupying this Greenland. What are the reasons? So first and foremost is its strategic location. When it comes to Greenland, it is world's largest island and it is very important from geostrategic perspective. Why? Because it is situated close to the Arctic region and the emerging shipping lanes around this Arctic region, wherein the China and Russia are increasing their presence. And it served as a vital base of operation during the Cold War period as well. And therein, the US has one of its bases also, that is Putufik Space Base, okay, which was formerly known as Thule Air Base. Then, from Greenland, if the Greenland is under the control of US would be able to effectively monitor the activities of Russia as well as China in this particular region, as well as North Korea. And when it comes to China and Russia, since they have, reportedly increase their military capabilities in this region. That is the reason it is becoming all the more important from US perspective that it occupies this Greenland region. Then, not just from strategic location point of view, this region is also important from the resource point of view. So when it comes to Greenland, it have large reserve, not just of the traditional sources like gold, nickel, cobalt, it also have rare earth minerals, which are very much important for the new industries as well as for the military application. And when it comes to China, it is the leading supplier of rare earth elements, we know that, and China too has entered Greenland in a big way. Okay, so it has entered into this mining industry when it comes to Greenland. And China accounts for 11% of the investment when it comes to mineral sector in Greenland. So this is another reason why US is interested in occupying or to get a hold of the Greenland. So ultimately it is because China is increasing its presence in this Greenland, and way back in 2018 China has come up with its plans of creating a polar silk road, and Chinese presence is not could be seen only in the mineral sector in Greenland. It has also provided the requisite funds for creation of new infrastructure, okay, which aimed at facilitating greater use of Arctic Sea routes. So all these things, especially the Chinese presence and the Chinese footprint in Greenland region, has become the major reason why Trump wants to get a hold of this particular Greenland region. Okay, that's all with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, in the Delhi riots case, the Supreme Court has created a hierarchy of offenders and it has denied bail to the masterminds, that is Khalid and Imam, and it has allowed the granting of bail to the other 5 accused in this particular case. This particular topic you can associate with the polity section of your prelim syllabus. Now, according to the Supreme Court, when it comes to the 2020 Delhi riots conspiracy case, the bail has been denied to Umar Khalid and Sarjeel Imam because according to the Supreme Court, they were the one who were the architects of this particular conspiracy, whereas these other 5 people were merely the facilitators. Okay, they were just executing the orders on the ground given by these 2 masterminds. So, when it comes to this particular case, herein the Supreme Court has looked into that what was the individual contribution to this particular, conspiracy that took place in Delhi. So, according to the Supreme Court, Khalid and Imam were the masterminds and they were the ideological drivers because they were the one who formulated the strategy of converting the protest against Citizenship Amendment Act into a road blockade, and that led to paralyzing the movement of people as well as vehicles in the Delhi. Whereas the other 5 people, they were just executing the orders given by these 2. Okay, so according to the Supreme Court, denying bail to the other 5 accused who were merely facilitating the orders given by these 2 masterminds would be disproportionate. Okay, keeping them in custody indefinitely would be disproportionate. And in this particular judgment, the Supreme Court has also widened the definition of terrorist act under UAPA, that is Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, Prevent Terrorism Act. Okay. Now, in this particular judgment, the Supreme Court has provided the clarification that what this terrorist act under section 15 of UAPA Act actually implies. Normally, we have this understanding that when it comes to terrorist act under UAPA, it basically refers to use of conventional weapons like bombs or firearms. But in this particular landmark judgment, the Supreme Court has stated that the terrorist act under section 15 of UAPA also includes the act which are being done to jeopardize the economic security of the nation and to disrupt the essential services, and that was something that was done by Khalid and Imam, who were the masterminds. As this blockade was also coinciding with the international event because way back in 2020, the US President Donald Trump was, visiting India. Okay, so that is the reason the Supreme Court in this particular judgment has stated that terrorist act under section 15 of UAPA Act does not merely mean use of conventional weapons like bombs, firearms, etc. If any act is jeopardizing the economic security of nation, then that would also be categorized as a terrorist act under section 15 of UAPA. Okay. When it comes to section 43D, clause 5 of the UAPA Act, no accused can be released on bail if the court is of the opinion that the accusation are prima facie true. And that is the case with the 2 masterminds who have been denied bail in this particular case. Now, the people, the accused in this particular case, they made a argument that way back in 2021, Supreme Court in Union of India versus K.A. Najib case has stated that the constitutional courts can grant bail despite the UAPA bar, okay, if there is no likelihood of a speedy trial. Normally, if someone is accused under this particular act, they are not provided bail because we have this notion that if they are released, then they can, jeopardize the security of nation. Okay, but in this 2021 judgment of the Supreme Court has stated that the courts can grant bail under this particular, act also if the trial is not completed in a timely manner to basically protect the right to life of the individual, which is provided under Article 21. But in this particular judgment, Supreme Court stated that you can't give this reason that you are put behind the bars since 2020 as a ground for bail. Okay, because it took the police forces this much amount of time because there was, voluminous evidence. They have to go through thousands of documents and they have to interrogate more than 800 witnesses. So that was the reason there was a valid justification why the trial got delayed. Okay. And when it comes to the mastermind, that is Khalid and Imam, their offense more or less has been somewhere been proved, and it has been proved that they were the masterminds when it comes to this riots that took place in 2020. When it comes to the other people, going by this logic that keeping them behind the bars would not be proportionate. And when it comes to the facilitators, the Supreme Court was of the opinion that even if they are granted bail, they don't possess the capacity to threaten the trial process. Okay, so Supreme Court provided them liberty, that is by providing them bail. But when it comes to the two masterminds, the Supreme Court was of the opinion that if they are provided bail, then they can tamper the evidences, okay, or they can threaten the trial process. Now, when it comes to the 5 people who have been granted relief in this particular case, the Supreme Court has also imposed certain conditions of them also. For example, they have to, make a personal bond of 2 lakh rupees, and they cannot leave the National Capital Territory of Delhi. They have to surrender their passport so that they cannot leave the country, and they have to report the Delhi Police Crime Branch police station twice a week. Okay, so these are the conditions which have been imposed on the 5 people who have been granted relief in this particular case. Okay, and this has been done so that they don't tamper with the evidences or influence the witnesses in this particular case. When it comes to the masterminds, that is Khalid and Imam, in this respect, the Supreme Court has acknowledged that the pace of the trial is not that fast. Okay, so the Supreme Court has provided them also with a specific window within which they can apply for bail again. What are those 2 conditions? So, if the trial court complete the examination of the protected witnesses, in that case they can apply, or upon the expiry of 1 year from the date of this particular order. Okay, whichever is earlier, in that case these 2 masterminds can also reapply for bail. That's all that we need to know with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, recently it has been found that one of the AI tool, that is Grok, is producing objectionable pictures of women. This particular topic you can associate with science and tech portion of a prelim syllabus, and you can also quote this as an example in your ethics paper, wherein you get question with respect to technological ethics. Okay. Now, what is happening? I've told you, when it comes to this Grok AI, when a user having anonymity is telling this AI tool that you produce objectionable pictures of women, so it is doing so. But the question emerges here, that is also with respect to technological ethics, that if something goes wrong, who should be held accountable? That question is also arising here as well. Who should face the consequences? Whether the developer should face the consequence, okay, the owner of that particular tool, the developer, or the person who have given this command to this AI tool. Who should be held accountable in this particular case? Whereas when it comes to the owner, that is Elon Musk, he has said that if anybody is using this tool to make illegal content, he or she would suffer the same consequences if they upload illegal content. Okay, so if you are using this particular AI tool for producing objectionable pictures of women, according to the Elon Musk, this would lead you to face consequences that you might be facing if you are posting illegal content. But when it comes to Indian government somewhere holds the owner accountable, because if this AI tool is producing objectionable pictures of women, somewhere that is how that AI tool has been trained. When it comes to Indian laws, safe harbor is associated with social media intermediaries. What is the safe harbor? So the safe harbor protection is provided to social media intermediaries under the IT Act of 2000. Okay, so if I am posting something on social media, it is not the social media intermediary which would be held accountable, provided the social media intermediary follow the guidelines given by the government. Let's suppose the content that I posted was objectionable. So in that respect, if the government get to know that, okay, the content that was posted by me is objectionable, it would give the direction to that particular social media intermediary that you delete that particular content. If they follow the guideline or whatever is suggested by the government authority, in that case only they would be enjoying this legal immunity. That means no legal action would be taken against the social media intermediary. That is what is safe harbor protection. But the problem is, when it comes to AI tools like Grok, here generation of content is being done autonomously. I am not posting any content, you are not posting any content, I am just giving the direction and that AI tool is producing that content. So in this case, it becomes very difficult to set the accountability, whether I should be held accountable because I just gave you the command and you are the one, the AI tool is the one which is producing that particular objectionable picture. Okay, so that is the reason fixing accountability is becoming more difficult when you go by the safe harbor protection aspect. Okay. And why the Indian government is of the view that ultimately the owner of the platform and the developer should be held accountable, because if this tool is able to produce objectionable picture, that means the developers have trained that particular tool in that way. It is not able to come up on its own. Okay, so that is the reason Indian government is especially of this view that we should hold the developer and the company owner accountable. Okay, that is what the Indian government has told, that it is a objectionable issue and misusing Grok to create objectionable content is not at all authorized. Okay, if you go by the IT rules also and if you go by the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita also, therein we have a particular section related to obscene, indecent, vulgar, pornographic and other content which is derogatory towards women. And it has pointed out that X has issued a notice of failure of safeguards and non-compliance when it comes to Indian laws. So the Indian government has pointed out that if this tool is producing such objectionable picture, somewhere the X company is not able to follow the Indian laws. And overall, globally also, the debates are going on that whether the safe harbor provision are still appropriate in the current times. Because see, safe harbor principle, protection that was provided to social media intermediaries, previously it was fine because the government know that, okay, I am the one who posted that objectionable content. But in case of AI tool, I am not posting, I am just giving you the direction. It is the tool which is producing that particular content. So that is the reason it becomes difficult to set the accountability. Okay, so it is not a new problem. AI tools have been used to generate such content time and again. But the concern is, if such things go on endlessly, this is going to severely impact the participation of women when it comes to digital space. So the company should take due diligence when it comes to these such instances, and we should move in the direction of responsible AI and ethical AI. So the data set on which we are training, that should be transparent, and we should make sure that whatever content the AI tool is producing, the developers or the company should be held accountable in that respect. Okay, so greater legal compliance, review of internal compliance mechanism is the need of the hour. And the Indian Ministry has also issued an advisory urging all such platforms not to host obscene or vulgar content. It is the right time that we make sure that all the developers and the companies move in the direction of transparent and unbiased data sets, and they follow the responsible and ethical AI. That's all with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, recently, keeping in mind the riots going on in the state of Iran, the Indian government has made a request to Indians that you refrain from traveling to Iran. This particular topic you can associate with the economy section of the prelim syllabus. Why? Because we are going to understand that what is this devaluation, okay? Because that is the reason we are witnessing riots in the Iran. Now, we have two words, devaluation and depreciation. So when I say depreciation or appreciation, that is something which is associated with flexible exchange rate regime, wherein everything is decided based on the market forces of demand and supply. Okay, let's suppose initially the exchange rate was settled here. Now from here to here, what has happened? If the demand for dollar increases, okay, that is what the shift in this demand curve is showing, and the supply curve has not changed at all. So ultimately rupee would depreciate. The people who don't know exchange rate basically is that how many amounts of domestic currency I have to give to get 1 unit of the foreign currency. Okay, that is what is exchange rate. So here what is happening is the demand for dollar has increased as compared to supply for dollar. Supply for dollar is constant, but the demand for dollar has increased. So that is the reason in economics, whenever the demand for any commodity would increase, ultimately you have to pay a higher price. Okay, and that is what is happening. Previously, I have to pay only 60 rupees. Now here I have to pay 70 rupees to get $1. Okay, the reverse scenario could also be the case. Here the demand has increased, supply was constant. The another scenario could be demand of the dollar is constant, but due to some reason the supply of dollar has gone down. That could be another scenario. Again, what would be happening? Here we will be witnessing depreciation. So remember, depreciation or appreciation is associated with flexible exchange rate regime. Okay, the reverse would be appreciation. Now let's understand what is devaluation. So devaluation is something which is associated with fixed exchange rate regime. Herein it is the government which would be fixing the exchange rate at a particular level. Let's suppose when it comes to market forces of demand and supply, here we are showing demand for dollar, here we have supply of dollar. According to market forces of demand and supply, exchange rate is settled somewhere here. I am assuming $1 equals to 60 rupees here. Okay, that is the exchange rate. But the government want to devalue the Indian currency. Okay, so devaluation means basically I have to give more Indian rupee to buy 1 unit of dollar. So I want to set exchange rate here. So here $1 equals to 70 rupees. But market forces decide exchange rate at this place. How I'll be able to maintain the exchange rate at E1 level? So for that, here I need to look that what is higher. Here as you can see, the supply of dollar is greater than the demand for dollar. So if the government wants to maintain exchange rate at this level, we need to buy dollars. Okay, we need to reduce this excess supply that is there. In case I want to move from E to E2, here what I am doing revaluation. Okay, so here $1 would become equal to 50 rupees. In this case, just look into this. What we are seeing at C and D, here demand for dollar is greater than the supply for dollar. So what will I have to do? I'll have to sell dollars to satisfy this excess demand, and that's how you can do devaluation or revaluation. Okay, this is something which is associated with the fixed exchange rate regime. When it comes to India, we follow managed floating exchange rate regime, wherein majority of the time it is the market forces which determine the exchange rate. But if there is high volatility in the exchange rate, only then the RBI would be intervening in the exchange rate market. Okay, so on this particular topic of devaluation, we have a PYQ asked in 2021. Just let's look into that. So the question is asking, if a country is doing devaluation of its currency, what would be the outcome? And we have to pay attention to this necessarily. Okay, so obviously when there would be devaluation, the exports would become more and more competitive. Let's understand this with the help of example. Let's suppose $1 was initially equal to 50 rupees. Now $1 after devaluation has become equal to 70 rupees. Okay, somebody in US is exporting 1 kg of onion, and 1 kg of onion is costing 50 rupees. So in this case, that person would have to give $1, but after devaluation, the person who is importing onion from India would have to merely pay 0.5 or half a dollar. Okay, so that clearly tells me that my exports become competitive. So first is correct. It increases the foreign value of domestic currency. No, it actually reduces the foreign value of domestic currency, because from 50 rupees, now I have to give 70 rupees to buy 1 unit of dollar. Okay, so if you eliminate 2, you are left with just 2 options. Here the answer, we can deduce that it is A. Majority of the students are confused that why third, this third statement is incorrect. This is why, Because whenever there is devaluation, you have to pay for the imports. Because of devaluation, the exports have become competitive, but the imports become costly. And it is very difficult to adjust the imports, in a shorter time frame. So initially what would happen, since you have to pay larger for your import bill, so initially your trade balance would deteriorate, and after a point of time, when I am able to adjust my import, demand, keeping in light that imports have become costly, then only the trade balance starts to get improved. This is also termed to be as J effect in economics. Okay, so that is why answer would be A. With this, let's move on to last topics of today's analyst. Now, recently, the Samudra Pratap has been inducted in the Indian Coast Guard. This particular topic you can associate with the defense section of your prelim syllabus. This is a pollution control vessel, okay, which have been inducted in the Indian Coast Guard, and it has been built with 60% indigenous content. Okay, so this is a move how we are moving towards Atmanirbharta in the defense domain as well. It has been built by Goa Shipyard Limited, and it would be the largest ship in the Indian Coast Guard fleet so far. It has enhanced capability when it comes to pollution response, firefighting, maritime safety, environmental protection, etc. And it would enable us to do surveillance across our maritime zones as well. The vessel is integrated with, multiple roles. It is effective not only for pollution control but also for patrolling of the coastal regions. And it has advanced pollution detection system as well. Okay. Now, let's just look into further points with respect to Samudra Pratap. So, it is the first indigenously built and designed pollution control vessel of the Indian Coast Guard, and this we have read that this would be the largest ship when it comes to Indian Coast Guard fleet. It has the capacity to displace more than 4,000 tons of water, and it is armed with the state-of-the-art technology like different kinds of guns and fire control system. Then it has advanced system like, for example, integrated bridge system, which integrates radar, GPS, autopilot, gyrocompass, communication systems, etc. And it also have integrated platform management system, which monitors and control onboard machinery. Okay, and it has automated power management as well as high capacity external firefighting system as well. This would be the first Indian Coast Guard ship to be equipped with dynamic position capability. Okay, so it does not need a harbor. Okay, it can maintain its position in the seas effectively. It is equipped with the advanced system to detect oil spills, and that is why it is said that it is a pollution control vessel. It is capable of high precision operation. It can recover the pollutants from the viscous oil and analyze the contaminants and separate oil from contaminated water as well. That is why it is said that it would be effective in dealing with oil spills incidents. Okay, that's all that we have to know in today's analyst. Quiz would be coming right up next, so don't forget to practice the quiz and check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a great day, all of you.